Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. While we give everyone a moment to join, why don't you jump in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from today? We have in New York City, Hamden, Long Island, New York, San Antonio, Texas, Fairfield, Connecticut, Buffalo. Oh, a lot of folks coming in. Spiders from Mars, nice. Ontario, Northern California, Sharon, Connecticut, all over the place. Well, great. Well, hello, my name is Rich Merritt, and I'll be your host today. This webinar is brought to you by the Audubon State Offices of Connecticut and New York, whose mission it is to protect birds and the places we all need in our forests, on our coast, and across local communities. A quick note that this webinar is being recorded and will soon be available on our YouTube and Facebook pages. And questions are welcome in the chat box at any time. And at the end, we'll have time for some question and answers. We're fortunate to have two presenters today who will be speaking to us about the critically important science and solutions behind bird window collisions, about why birds hit windows and what steps we can take to reduce those violent collisions. First, Kaitlyn Parkins is the Glass Collisions Program Coordinator for American Bird Conservancy, where she works to make the built environment safer for birds through education, advocacy, and advancing research on bird window collisions. Prior to joining ABC, Kaitlyn was a member of the science team at New York City Audubon, where she worked to help pass New York City's groundbreaking bird-friendly building and lights out legislation. Kaitlyn holds an MS in biology and an advanced certificate in conservation biology from Fordham University and a BA in biology and psychology from McDaniel College. And some of you might remember Kaitlyn when she joined us to facilitate question and answers during our webinar on bird-friendly roofs about a year ago. Welcome, Kaitlyn.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
You bet. Also joining us is Anikó Tótha. As Bird Collisions Glass Testing Coordinator, Anikó manages the American Bird Conservancy's program to evaluate and rate bird-friendly materials. Prior to joining ABC, she was a keeper in the Department of Ornithology at the Wildlife Conservation Society's Bronx Zoo, overseeing one of the most diverse collections of birds in the world. Anikó has also held positions researching seabirds off the coast of California, salt marsh and Nelson sparrow breeding success in Maine, passerine stopover ecology study in the Meadowlands of New Jersey, and the Bird Collisions Glass Testing Tunnel in Bronx, New York. Anikó received her bachelor's degree in environmental science at Ramapo College and her master's degree in biology with Miami University of Ohio. Thanks for joining us, Anikó.
Thanks so much, Rich. I'm so happy to be here.
And with that, Kaitlyn and Anikó, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thanks, Rich. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today to talk about this really important bird conservation issue. So Anikó and I are actually going to tag team this presentation today. I'm going to get us started with some background on window collisions and some of the basics. So first, to get us on the same page, there are two different types of window collisions that folks often are thinking about. The first kind is when birds will attack their own reflections in windows. They can be an incredible nuisance. That's like this male cardinal pictured here. And the solutions that work for this type of collision or for other types of collisions aren't necessarily going to work for this particular type of collision. What you need to do is actually entirely eliminate the bird's view of itself in the window to stop this from happening. The second kind of collision is when birds fly full speed into glass as if it's habitat that they can move right through. This type of collision often results in severe injury or even death, and that is our focus today. So first of all, why are collisions a problem at all? In 2014, in a study led by Dr. Scott Loss, they estimated that 500 million to 1 billion birds die every year from collisions with glass. This makes collisions the second largest direct cause of mortality for birds in the US, with the first being free-roaming cats. It's also been nearly 10 years since that study was conducted, and with continued development and construction of modern buildings that use huge expanses of glass, it's very likely that we're actually surpassing that number at this point. So beyond the sadness of an individual bird's death, which I think a lot of us have probably experienced, collisions are a real and very large-scale conservation issue. So why do we need birds? Why should we care at all? I think most of you who are joining an Audubon Connecticut or Audubon New York webinar probably know how important birds are, but not everybody does. And so one of the most important things that you can do to help birds is educate people on their value, not just their cultural and intrinsic value, but for selfish reasons as well. We need birds. They contribute billions of dollars in ecosystem services. They regenerate forests after fires and pest infections by dispersing seeds. They also eat insects that might destroy crops or destroy those forests or carry diseases like malaria. Birding or bird watching in itself is an enormous industry, from the home bird feeder to competitive birders. The equipment and travel that folks invest in this hobby is significant, and that translates to jobs and money for local economies. So there's a lot riding on birds, and we really need to do what we can to protect them. So what do we need to know to address this problem? Collisions is a really great issue in that we already know everything we need to know to stop them. The goal is to put that knowledge into practice, and we're hoping we can help do that a little bit today. So most people think that collisions are a rare occurrence. We've all sort of probably had that experience, and despite nearly everyone having the experience of a window collision, of finding a bird or hearing a bird hit their window, most people don't necessarily grasp the magnitude of the problem in order for everyone to have had that similar experience. We get asked often, you know, if this is such a big source of bird mortality, why don't we see more dead birds? Why don't we see more carcasses? And the answer is there's a couple different things going on. One, a bird might fall behind a grate or behind a wall. A big reason is that scavengers are very efficient. Raccoons, cats, rats, other birds will not only opportunistically pick up injured or dead birds that have died in window collisions, but they'll stake out windows that they know cause lots of collisions. I've heard from collision monitoring programs on the coast that they actually have to race herring gulls to injured birds that have hit windows. Additionally, you know, a lot of birds will be injured and fly away pretty quickly. A recent study came out where they used video cameras to monitor collisions in a home backyard, and they found that about 84% of window collisions resulted in the bird leaving within seconds of the collision. Those birds often sustain trauma that they don't survive, but we never see them. So there's no evidence of that collision happening, which means that it happens probably far more than we realize, and in places that we maybe think are safe. Which species are most at risk? So almost every species of bird out there has probably hit a window at some point or another. But the majority of birds that have died in collisions or that collide with windows are warblers, sparrows, thrushes. These are our songbirds, and these are species that migrate long distances between their breeding grounds and their summer grounds, basically running the gamut of North America twice a year. And these species migrate at night, which can be the source of some confusion. The birds aren't, for the most part, flying into tall buildings while migrating at night. There are instances where a combination of bright lights and bad weather and heavy migration can lead to these big bird mortality events at certain buildings, and these get a lot of publicity, but those events don't actually make up the majority of window collisions. Most birds are colliding with windows after they've stopped to rest and when they're active during the early morning and daytime hours. Which buildings are the most dangerous? There tends, like I said, tends to be an association between collisions and big high-rise buildings in cities. But in fact, almost 50% of collisions take place at homes and low-rise buildings. And almost all of the rest take place at mid-rise buildings, up to about 11 stories. So when collisions do take place on high-rise buildings, they're actually, for the most part, occurring at those lower to mid levels of the building. This is where the vegetation is, which means this is where the birds are most active in seeking food and seeking shelter. It's sort of like why most car accidents happen close to home, because that's where you're doing the most driving. This is where the birds are most active, and often the glass there reflects the vegetation, and that's what's causing a lot of collisions. There's a misconception that people can see glass. I bet almost everyone here knows someone that has run into glass, or maybe you've done it yourself. And that's because people tend to learn about glass as a concept when we're very young, and often through trial and error. Of course, unlike a bird, when we hit a window, we do so at low speeds and beyond some bumps and bruises. Most of the damage we sustain is to our egos. Humans use visual and architectural cues to learn to expect glass to be present in certain places. So let me show you what I mean. If I show you this picture of a tree, you can't tell me from the cues in this image whether this is an actual tree, whether this is a tree reflected in glass, or whether this is a tree viewed through glass. If I give you a little more context, a little more of a clue, you can see, okay, right angles aren't usually seen in nature. You might recognize those as mullions between panes of glass. You might see the crack in the pane of glass and realize this is a tree. Glass is involved somehow. This is a tree through glass or reflected in glass. And only when I back out and give you all of the context can you now tell, okay, this is a tree reflected in glass. Birds never learn that concept. They take what they see literally. So the trees in this photograph, birds perceive as real, and they'll fly to those trees, often with lethal results. These are reflected trees, but the same thing can happen when vegetation is seen through the glass, for example, in an atrium, a glass railing, a glass skywalk, or even a potted plant in a home. Anywhere where there's habitat birds want to get to and there's glass between them and that habitat can be lethal for birds. So how do we make glass bird friendly? It helps to know a little more about how birds see the world. Primates, we're primates. We have our eyes here in front of our head. We have good depth perception because both of our eyes see a lot of overlap in the image. And we see the world as something in front of us. Birds, on the other hand, have their eyes on the side of their head. They don't see the same thing with each eye. They have a beak in front of them. They don't have great 3D vision. And they presumably experience the world as something that they are immersed in and moving through. Our program director, Dr. Christine Shepard, says that she likes to use a model for a bird as it's a kid texting on a skateboard. So not really paying attention, looking down and moving fast. So how do we use that information to make glass bird friendly? Well, we use visual markers that birds see as solid and space them appropriately so the birds don't think that they can fit between them. It's not necessarily that the visual markers are making the birds see the glass, they're seeing the markers, and we need them to be close enough together so that birds don't think they can fit through. Birds have really accurate knowledge of how big their bodies are and how wide their wingspans are, and many species can maneuver through really tight spaces. So imagine a small songbird flying through the leaves and branches of a forest. So we base the guidelines for the spacing of visual markers based on bird bodies. And that means the markers should be spaced about 2 inches apart. Previously, the rule was 2 inches by 4 inches apart, but in practice, a lot of folks found that very small birds were still colliding. And so if we make the recommendations very small, 2 by 2 inches, and make that glass safe for birds like kinglets and hummingbirds, we can make the glass safe for all of the birds that are larger than them as well. The birds need to be able to see the pattern in time to change direction. So we found that if you're using horizontal or vertical lines, they should be at least 1/8 of an inch in width. If you're using dots, they should be at least 1/4 inch in diameter. We've also found that irregular patterns seem to work better than regular patterns, so you can really get creative with this. So what makes a building bird friendly? I'm not going to go too much in depth on this today because our focus isn't necessarily commercial buildings, but I do want to touch on this because I know we have a lot of really engaged folks in this webinar today. So the building on the left is not bird friendly. It has trees reflected in glass. It's essentially a bird death trap. But many people, especially, for example, the architects that we work with, think that in order to make a bird-friendly building, you have to design a really bland windowless warehouse like the picture on the right. And that's not the case. Bird-friendly buildings can be beautiful and interesting, and it's not just about swapping out glass and building the exact same building with bird-friendly glass, though bird-friendly glass is important, but there are all sorts of design features and options that can reduce collisions. None of the buildings in this picture were built specifically to be bird-friendly, but they all are due to the design features that they incorporate, such as louvers or window shades. Of course, if you do want to build a bird-friendly glass box, you can. This is the Intuit headquarters in Mountain View, California, which is a city that requires bird-friendly design. The narrow horizontal stripe they chose, that allows views out of it. From the parking lot, you really can't see the pattern at all. But if you're a bird and you get within 6 to 10 feet, you can see that line and you have time to change direction. This is an example with a vertical stripe. It also reduces the glare inside the building. And this one you can see a little bit more clearly from further away. And this is a kind of weirdly designed building. And this was not designed for birds either, but it has a sunshade on it that makes it bird friendly. There's actually a lot of overlap between strategies for controlling heat and light that also make buildings bird friendly. So in this case, the sunshade obscures most of the glass and protects birds. There's a lot more information on this that I could share with you. I could do a whole webinar on it. But if you'd like more information, you can go to the link here, which will also get dropped in the chat, and find our resources for bird-friendly building design or bird-friendly design book, a gallery of bird-friendly buildings, and other resources kind of from the perspective of an architect or a builder. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Anikó for the next part.
Thanks, Kaitlyn. That was great. All right. So thanks for joining me, everyone. So how do we know what materials are bird friendly? So one way that American Bird Conservancy determines bird friendly materials is through tunnel testing. And we do have other methods as well, but this is the one of the projects that I manage at American Bird Conservancy. And we wanted to let you guys know a little bit more about it today. So one of the ways is through tunnel testing. What is this thing? This massive apparatus in the middle of a field. So in the early 2000s, Martin Rosler in Austria created the first tunnel to test proposed solutions to bird collisions on freestanding noise barriers. And in 2009, American Bird Conservancy's Director of Bird Collisions, Dr. Christine Shepard, adopted that glass testing tunnel design, and we have since been using the glass testing tunnel to test potentially bird-friendly materials in now 2 locations, Maryland and Pennsylvania. So what is tunnel testing and how does it work? Tunnel testing is a non-injurious standardized binomial choice technique.
Hey, Anikó.
Yeah.
Sorry, it doesn't look like anyone can see your screen. We just see you right now. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I thought it was just me.
Oh, sorry, guys. Oh, how's that?
All good. Thanks.
Oh, I apologize. All right. Okay. So you guys didn't miss much, just the photos. All right, great. So here's that apparatus that I was just telling you guys about. So this apparatus in the middle of the field. So tunnel testing is a non-injurious standardized binomial choice technique that uses wild songbirds to determine the relative effectiveness of different patterns of visual markers at deterring bird collisions. So I'll go into a little more depth on that, but not too much. So here you can see the glass technician managing the tunnel. And here at the end of the tunnel is where she would be loading glass in to be tested. So what does that look like up close? There we go. So here we go, there's 3 separate photos of the tunnel. In a test flight, a bird flies down a completely dark space. So on the left-hand side photo, you can see there's different things on that gray painted wall there. So in the center is a port where a live bird would be entered inside the tunnel. So into this completely dark space, the tunnel, toward a light at the far end. So the bird's view from the our end of the tunnel is what you see in that middle photo. So where side-by-side panels of glass appear to offer exit routes. One of those panes of glass is clear, unmarked glass, in this case, the left-hand side glass. That is the control, and it's virtually invisible to birds. And on the other side, the right-hand side, is the pattern of visual markers under evaluation, the test pane. In this case, a black line spaced 1 inch apart. So please be reassured that there is a net at the end of this tunnel. So about 2 feet in front of those test panes is a net that catches the bird. So the bird is stopped safely before it can get to the glass, and after one trial, a bird is immediately released. When few birds fly to the pattern glass, we believe that they are seeing and avoiding the visual markers. Every test pane has at least 80 individual birds flown down the tunnel, and we record the percent that flies toward the test pane. For example, suppose 80 birds fly down the tunnel with 20 flying toward the test pane and 60 towards the control. That would mean 25% of birds flew towards the test pane, and it would have a threat factor of 25. Threat factor is the language that American Bird Conservancy uses to rate potentially bird-friendly materials, or in this case, a bird-friendly material. ABC defines bird-friendly materials as having a threat factor less than or equal to 30, corresponding to an estimated reduction of collisions of at least 50% under real-world conditions. Because honestly, there is nothing out there that is honestly 100% bird safe. So you can see in these photos, the left is where the bird goes in, it flies towards that center picture, and then it's released with that little white door with the black handle and goes about its business. It takes no more than 30 seconds. So what can you do at home? This is my favorite part to talk about. The one positive thing about glass collisions is there is something we at home can actually do something about with surprisingly very little effort. It's bird conservation at our fingertips. If you have bird baths, feeders, a garden, you want to ensure that your windows are bird friendly. Since you're creating such a happy habitat for them, you'd want to keep them safe around your windows. So how can we do that? I hope not to overwhelm you with the following solutions that we have at hand, but we want to offer for different budgets and also different creativity levels, or whether you like DIY or not so much. So we'll just go through a few of them today, but you can find all of them that are available on our website. So let's start with external insect screens. I have great news. If you have a home with already built-in external insect screens, you can turn off this webinar, you can go about your business because your home is already bird friendly, but please don't leave because we do have a lot of great information here. So in this first photo, you can see that on the left-hand side, there is an external insect screen, and on the right-hand side, there is not. You can see how well that external insect screen really diffuses the reflection, disrupting the continuation of habitat that birds can get confused by, as opposed to that right-hand side window that is obviously reflecting sky and vegetation, where the bird can obviously get very easily confused. On the right-hand side is just a beautiful picture of Sully the cat also enjoying window film that is equally effective for birds, noting the spacing. So for those of you that are creatively inclined, so not me, tempera paint or acrylic paint or puffy paint are really great cost-effective options. Keeping spacing in mind, you can get really creative here, even doing seasonal options for your windows. When you get tired of it, you might put a little elbow grease in, wipe it off. You can get, again, really creative here. These are some really beautiful windows that you can create with just simple paint from your local craft store. If you're less creatively inclined like me, white squiggly lines always do a great job. Simple and effective. Just some white paint, slap it on there. You can draw a fun fish if you like to. There is also something that is a dry soap in a spray can that is really easily applied and easily to come off as well. And these can last as long as you want them to. You can touch them up or remove them when you get bored and you want something fresh and new. North Carolina Zoo had a wonderful idea of using a stencil roller to apply paint to their glass. So you can see it's a really great way to add a uniform pattern to your glass. You can get it online at your local craft store. Again, just roll it in your favorite color paint and roll it right onto the glass. Again, can last as long as you want it to, remove it, change it as often as you like. ABC bird tape is another great solution. It's not available right now, but it will be soon. We've been working hard at getting it ready. So there are different variations of this product, one of them being squares and the other one being just normal tape, and it comes with directions on how to apply and how to remove. It can be pretty long lasting. It can take a little bit of elbow grease to remove, but it's not so hard. Also, in this case, keep spacing in mind. That is the number one thing. If you're just going to do the squares, no more than 2 inches apart. Same for if you want to do diagonal, vertical, horizontal lines, or you could cut the tape into smaller pieces and make fun shapes like they did at Virginia Zoo in that little giraffe shape there. Decals. So decals have been around forever. Back in the day when people thought, all right, let me fix my window. I had a bird fly into it, unfortunately. Let me put a decal on there. That's going to help. I can promise you that putting one falcon silhouette on your window is not going to do much to decrease bird collisions, because the bird's just going to fly right around that falcon silhouette. You can see in that first photo that there are several falcon silhouettes with mini decals in between to break up that spacing. So that's what you're going to have to do if you want to use decals. So it is a great way. It's very easy to apply and remove, but you're just going to need a lot of them to make sure you have the appropriate spacing. And if you have a Cricut, you can print your own vinyl decals, which is a nice fun project to do at home. Ocopian bird savers are also a great solution. It can be DIY, or you can have them installed. This is essentially a paracord spaced no more than 4 inches apart that hangs outside of your window in front of it, and it hangs down. You can either secure the bottom half or just let it hang loose, because they do also go by the Zen wind curtain name, and they're nice when they blow in the wind. But you can see that these won't obstruct your view at all. You can still see, if you have a nice big window in your home, you'll still be able to see out and you'll enjoy that view. Another great solution that offers the same things as that view did with the ones I mentioned before is bird crash preventers. This is a monofilament or a fishing line that is held taut in front of your window with 2 brackets in above and below. And those are spaced about 3 inches apart, and you can see those are virtually invisible. And they come already mounted to the brackets, so it's really easy to install and remove. You can just roll them right back up. And again, you hold on to your view, but they have proven to be pretty effective at home. Easy Up Shades is another great solution. So this is essentially a shade cloth with suction cups on it that you put onto the outside of your window, and you can see that it basically takes away the reflection. It removes the window completely from the outside. You can't even see it. And it'll work really great in that upstairs room that gets a lot of sun in the summertime. Bird screen is another great solution if you don't have insect screens installed on the outside. So you can see they work just the same as external insect screens do, where they diffuse that reflection, where that confusion of the continuation of habitat for birds is decreased completely. And these again can be suction cut to the outside of your screen door, or your glass door or window, or they can be mounted above and below it. So there are a few window films that are now available on the market. Window films can be installed professionally or DIY, or also window washers are doing them now. There's a lot of different ones to choose from. There are even ones you can design your own pattern, just keep spacing in mind. And one of the ones we like to talk about, of course, is feather friendly. They offer various patterns that are readily available. This one here in this photo is the 1/4 inch of a white dot in diameter, spaced 2 inches apart, very effective at stopping collisions. It's applied to the outside of the glass. And you can see in the second photo on the right-hand side from the inside looking out, it basically, those dots melt into whatever you're looking at. It doesn't obscure your view at all. Bird Divert is something new to the market. This is also a window film, but this is a window film of a UV dot matrix of UV absorbing and reflecting dots. So they're 3/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch spaced 2 inches apart. But you can see in this first photo on the left-hand side, that is what we see. So those dots basically disappear. But on the right-hand side, in birds that see into the UV spectrum, it offers enough of a visual marker for them. But please keep in mind that although most migrating sawbirds see UV, birds like hawks, pigeons, and doves do not. So this solution will not be effective to decrease the chance of those collisions. Also, in considering a UV pattern, keep in mind it needs sunlight to work efficiently. So shady areas are not ideal for this solution. Kaleidoscape white is another window film that can be applied professionally or DIY. It goes to the outside of your glass and it gives it this white appearance that's really great at diffusing reflection. But from the inside looking out, again, your view is not obscured. It's basically just disappears. External motorized shades are also a great solution, a little more expensive. So these are mounted to, these will have to be professionally installed. They're mounted to the outside of your glass. And obviously when they're down, they're going to decrease collisions immensely. So you would want to keep them down when birds are most active, during dawn and dusk, all times of the year, since collisions happen all of the time. But if those motorized shades are down, you're going to be lessening the chance of collisions happening at home. Plus, you'll be doing great on your heating and cooling bills. Last but not least, this is the last one we'll talk about today. I know that was a lot, is netting. This needs a little more upkeep. Netting needs to be kept taut in front of the glass. It needs to be checked frequently for any holes to make sure no wild animals can get caught or injured in any holes or an end that is not taut any longer, left loose. A really effective way of stopping collisions, and also won't obstruct the view. So again, I know this was a lot of information. Luckily, this is all at your fingertips on our website at birdsmartglass.org. There you can also find this great flyer that you can send to friends or print out and pin up at your local store if they let you. It's just some more DIY solutions to how to make your home a little more bird friendly with your windows. And thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Anikó. We have lots of questions to answer at the end of this, and we will definitely be getting to all of those questions. Can we see my screen now? I think we're good. Yeah,
that's great.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And so now you know how to make your home safer for birds. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we can all work together to make our communities safer for birds. So my first piece of advice is to look for local efforts. This is the first thing ABC does whenever anyone reaches out to us about window collisions in their communities. Local Audubon chapters, ornithological societies, universities, many groups out there are doing this work. I wanted to highlight just a couple that were in the New England, New York, Connecticut region, including Lights Out Connecticut, New York City Audubon's Project Safe Flight program. Yale has a program where they're both monitoring and working on getting bird-friendly guidelines potentially incorporated. Bird Safe Maine is another really great group that's doing collision work in Maine. So I definitely first recommend reaching out to whoever's doing this work in your community and seeing how you can add capacity and help. Many of them need help with advocacy, potentially need help with collision monitoring. So there are possibly lots of options available in your local community. No matter where you are, you can always report a collision that you find using one of a couple different databases. There are three big options that I've highlighted here. iNaturalist is a great one. This is actually an app where you can report all types of live animal and plant sightings, but there are also a couple of dead bird projects. One of the great things about iNaturalist is that if you don't know what kind of bird you found, you can post a picture of it, and it has a community sort of crowdsourced ID feature, which is really cool. dBird is another one. This is a project of New York City Audubon in partnership with Seattle Audubon. dBird is really great in that it doesn't require anyone to create an account. So no one has to download an app or log in. So it's easy to get people who are maybe a little bit less invested in this to report collisions there. There's also the Global Bird Collision Mapper, which is a project of FLAP, which is up in Canada. It does work in the US, but I know especially in Canada, this is a great one to use. One thing to note is that none of these programs record zeros. In other words, you can say when a collision happened, but you can't say when a collision didn't happen. So personally, I don't love them for monitoring work for that reason, but they're really good for documenting collisions that would maybe otherwise go unreported. And a lot of scientists and researchers are now starting to pull data from these platforms to use it in scientific research projects. So it's a great way to contribute. Most community collisions work has two main goals. Fixing existing buildings and preventing new bad buildings from being built through mandatory ordinances, laws, and policies. Both of these approaches are very important. Even if we built every single building to be bird friendly, starting today, we'd still kill up to 1 billion birds a year with all of the existing buildings until we were able to fix all of that glass. So both of these are very important. I also want to touch on Lights Out program efforts. Oftentimes Lights Out is actually just the name of a program that works on collisions from multiple angles. But what I say here when I talk about lights out, I mean turning your lights out or getting other people to turn their lights out during spring and fall migration at night. It's important to note that lights out is really beneficial to all species, including people, but light tends to attract and can even disorient birds. If you turn your lights out at night, you likely won't significantly reduce collisions, especially at home windows, but it can keep birds from being attracted in by lights and being next to dangerous windows during the day where they can collide with those windows. So reducing artificial light at night, excuse me, is better for everyone. It's important though that lights out efforts are done hand in hand with fixing glass and never in place of it. If you have to pick just one, especially if it's at a specific bird killing building, glass should really be your #1 priority. And in an ideal world, we can do both. So let's start with fixing existing buildings. While we'd love to fix every single window, being pragmatic and recognizing the costs and the effort that goes into installing retrofits, the goal should really be to fix the bad windows and leave the rest. So here are the basic steps to doing that. First, pay attention, monitor. This way you can document collisions and figure out what your priority windows for fixing are. Step 2 is to plan a solution or advocate for one. 3 is to act, and 4 is to repeat steps 1 through 3 again. So let me elaborate a little bit on each of these. First, pay attention, monitor, document collisions. Any window where you've seen or heard a collision near feeders, near fruiting trees, near bird baths or other water sources, all of these should be priorities to fix. If you're monitoring more buildings, multiple buildings, or larger buildings, it's important to break up the facades into smaller chunks to see where those target areas should be. These are images from a project that my colleagues worked on with the Chicago collision monitors. And you can see, or maybe you can see in this center map, the Allen Center, it has one little bump out that accounts for 46.7% of all collisions at that building. So if you have limited funding, you're going to want to fix just that little part, because if you fix the other ones, you might waste money just to find out that collisions didn't decrease very much. It's also really important, I know I harp on this, record the zeros, record where you aren't finding birds as well as where you are finding birds. This can help with targeting certain facades, and it can also help you determine how effective your retrofits are if you monitor after installation, which you should. So if this is your property, then you're all set. I imagine that all of you care enough about birds that you'll find one of those solutions that Anikó mentioned and get it done. But if it's not your property, you're going to need to strategize. We've created a guide to help with this that is very detailed, but I want to highlight here that education is key. Most building owners have never thought about this before, or if they have thought of it, they might not realize the scope of the issue, or maybe they're just overwhelmed by all the different options available and they don't know how to pick the one that's right for their building. So it's always best to go in as a friend, to offer help. Remember, it's unfortunately not illegal to have a building that kills birds. So being friendly and helpful will go way further than being confrontational or accusatory. That said, persistence is key. I have been working with a building. I was alerted to the fact that it was a collision problem in 2018. I've been working with them since 2019. We're very close to having something installed, but not quite there yet. And it's been something of a frustrating situation, but that persistence we're hoping is going to pay off soon. So this can take some time. And then once you do, hopefully, fingers crossed, get that retrofit installed, I encourage folks to go back and continue monitoring. You can see if there are maybe other facades that would be good for retrofit. And we need more data on the effectiveness of these products in real world situations. So it's, I very much encourage you folks to continue monitoring, continue documenting collisions. This is a picture of a building in New York City. We worked with them. You can see they actually have feather friendly on this picture installed on the very top windows above the doors. And so they installed it in sort of bits and pieces, and we continued to work with them. And eventually they've covered a significant portion of the building. It also works if they install it on just a small section and they realize, hey, this isn't really obscuring my view and people don't think this is ugly. So they do a little bit and then they do a little more. And by the end, you've gotten them to do their whole building, which maybe they weren't amenable to in the beginning. New construction. Working building by building on new construction is incredibly time consuming as well. And it's not going to save a billion birds, but it can be helpful from the perspective of press and PR. There's lots of fanfare. You can get the word out, get news articles about it. This is the Milwaukee Bucks Stadium. Our colleague, Dr. Brian Lenz, worked on this. It's an awesome building, an inspiration. We can point to it for other stadiums that are going up now. And it took Brian over 3 years of working with them to make it happen. So just like I said before, persistence is key. If you do decide to go after a single building, the steps below will help you do so. Build a coalition, make sure that the developer knows there's lots of people who want this to happen, but make sure your coalition is speaking with a single coordinated voice and that there isn't mixed messaging. Know your ask, make sure you can tell them what bird friendly is and provide them resources on how to do that. And again, patience and persistence is key. You're not their number one priority, so you kind of just got to keep nudging in a friendly way. If you're going to target new construction and multiple buildings at a time, so you want to get guidelines or an ordinance in place that prevents bad buildings from being built, you basically are going to do the same steps. Build your coalition, though it might incorporate an elected official or an architecture firm or architects. Make sure you have that single voice, you know your ask, and you're patient and you persist. There are 2 ways to get new construction to be bird friendly. First is to adopt a policy without a law. This works well for organizations like universities, businesses, departments of transportation, etc. So this would be getting that agency on board to adopt a policy that all new buildings on their property or built by them or built by their agency or firm will be bird friendly. A great example of this is the South Korean Ministry of the Environment, which fixed all of the transparent noise barriers in the country, and all the new ones are also going to be bird friendly. And they didn't pass a law about it, they just adopted that policy. Another example might be a university that requires all buildings on campus to be bird friendly. And finally, your last option, and a great one, is to adopt an ordinance or a law. We do have a whole toolkit available for this, so I'm only going to barely scratch the surface of it, but we have lots of resources available. We have a model ordinance with the right language. It's pretty strong. If it was passed today, it would be the strictest ordinance in place, and it's a really good starting point. And we also have guidance for walking it back. We have a review of existing legislation, which we recommend and which we don't. We don't recommend just copying legislation from another city or town because those all have pros and cons, and they were all the result of compromises. So that model ordinance will be a really good tool to start with, and you can go from there. This is a list of current ordinances in North America with a couple that we're hoping to add soon that just need to get past that finish line. Unfortunately, these are all in the US. Ontario used to be on this list. Lots of municipalities in Ontario had passed bird-friendly design guidelines, and those were all recently repealed by a law passed at the province level. If you're interested in learning more about what's going on in Ontario, I highly recommend FLAP Canada as a great resource for that. You'll see New York City is highlighted because it is currently the strongest ordinance in place with all new construction required to be bird friendly up to 75 feet and adjacent to green roofs. And so here's a whole big list. We also go through all of these in more detail on the website, and that link I believe was probably dropped in the chat, but if not, I can make sure it happened. And I do want to mention voluntary guidelines. Numerous communities have them, and they take a ton of effort to get in place and unfortunately are rarely used. So we do recommend going for that mandatory ordinance. And of course, that's a big ask, and ABC is very much here to help. If you're working on any of this today, you can reach every link that we shared by typing birdsmartglass.org into your browser. And of course, feel free to reach out to us with additional questions, or reach out to Audubon Connecticut and Audubon New York, and they will get you connected with us as well. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll take some questions.
Wow, what a fascinating presentation that you both just gave us. This is great. And I can tell it was great interest to our audience today, too, from the incredible number of questions that we'll try to get to as many as we can with the time we have left. If we haven't asked a question, please use the chat. I'll try to direct these questions to you based on what you did, but there's a lot of overlap in what you just presented on. So if you felt you wanted to pass the baton to one another when I ask these, please feel free. I'm going to start with Anikó. There was a number of questions asking about, specifically they asked about the ABC bird tape originally, but there was some other ones, whether it's more effective to have those things internally or externally on the glass. Does it matter? Is one more effective?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry if that wasn't clear. External is always best. So as Kaitlyn mentioned, reflection is a big issue. So by having the bird deterrent on the outside of the glass, that will help break up that reflection. So putting it on the inside of the glass, especially with older windows or newer windows, depending what your home has, that reflection can be really strong. And sometimes that pattern on the inside of the glass just won't be visible depending on the time of day. So if you can do it on the outside, that is the best way to do it. But I understand that's not always possible, especially on hard to reach areas. So what you can do as a little experiment is put little Post-it notes on the inside of your glass and check it at different times of day because the light changes. And you can see how visible it is from the inside or not. So certain times of the day it will be more effective than others, but outside is always best.
Okay, great. I'm going to follow up a question right back to you too, because there was several questions about using some techniques that I think we've heard about over the years. You didn't mention today, and whether or not they're effective, like closed blinds, fishing line, balloons, even. Are any of those work at all? Or
the fishing line I mentioned today, that is the bird crash preventers. That is effective. It's proven to be effective. We've had very positive feedback on that. Balloons I haven't heard of. That's a new one for me. So I would love to hear more about that. What was the third one you mentioned, Rich?
I think closing the blinds.
Closing the blinds. So again, that would be certain times of the day, but if they're closed completely, that's going to make say if they're white blinds or black blinds, that can really enhance the reflection from the outside really well. So it would end up being maybe even a little more dangerous than better. But if you have the blinds kind of a little open, whether they're horizontal or vertical slats, that can actually sometimes create a pattern. Again, only tiny parts of the day, so it's not always going to be a great solution. Outside is always best.
Great, thank you. Kaitlyn, I got a question too. I think it's kind of related to this, but you mentioned early talking about like low impact collisions, or seeing the reflection in the glass. I know we're concerned mostly with bird mortality, but there's also the issue of things like cardinals was a specific example they gave. Do these things work on those low impact collisions as well? These methods?
Yeah, I mean, so for that territorial aggression, you're going to really want to totally black out the reflection, like just entirely cover your window until that bird has moved on. Unfortunately, the patterns, this isn't about the bird being able to fit in between the space. It's about the bird seeing itself and wanting to fight itself, essentially. So you also, I mean, a lot of these deterrents also will, even if the bird only has time to slow down, the bird might slow down and hit the glass a little less hard, which in theory is better. Unfortunately, we don't have much evidence on whether those low impact collisions eventually result in bird death. Unfortunately, because of the types of brain trauma and things that happen to birds when they hit windows, even those that don't die instantly often die later. So if you do find an injured bird, though, it is important to get it to a rehabber. The rehabbers I've spoken with say they have about a 40% recovery rate for collisions, and they're able to give the birds anti-inflammatories and other things that enhance its chance for survival. So if you do find a bird and it's injured, contact your local, usually it's the Department of Conservation or the DNR, and they will have a list of rehabbers that you can contact nearby. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but maybe something folks would like to know.
No, that's great. You know, speaking of tangent too, a couple of people pointed out that that they seem to be seeing more collisions at their home of late, and at our Audubon office, we've been getting a lot more calls in the last 3 years. I don't know that that's necessarily a coincidence based on people spending more time at home in the COVID era. Do you think that we're having more bird collisions in the last 3 years, or it's just a factor of we're actually on hand more to see that before predators pick up the
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I certainly also experienced a lot more calls. I was working in New York City during COVID. And so as soon as everyone was at home, they realized that windows that they didn't think were a problem just weren't a problem when they were home, which is often in the evenings when it's darker and maybe the birds aren't moving around as much. And so I think a lot of it is that folks are now hearing collisions or noticing collisions. A lot of folks were outside, getting a lot of outdoor time during COVID and started paying attention. So as sad as it is, that increase in awareness has really helped with this cause. I also do think that I see a lot of development going up in my neighborhood, and every building is a little more modern with bigger windows than the last. So I think some new buildings also have a lot more glass, and because of that, maybe we actually are seeing an increase in the number of collisions.
Great. And to clarify something earlier, Anikó, I couldn't even read my own writing. I was thinking balloons because I think that that's sometimes used to deter woodpeckers from just banging on the side of a house. Somebody had asked about bar soap as a technique to draw stripes. Although if external is important, it's probably a very temporary solution, I would think.
Right. Yeah, balloons is new to me. That's wild. I'm gonna have to look that one up. I don't love balloons personally, so I would never recommend them. But bar soap, I'd imagine would be a good solution if it leaves enough of a mark. But again, it'll be pretty. It'll come off in the next rain, of course. But yes, if it leaves enough of a streak, that's pretty good.
Someone asked, they said they had quite a bit of glass around the front of their house, and they have a lot of decals on it, but they're somewhat spaced apart. Are decals, is with as large as 12-inch gaps still effective? Maybe not as effective as having the smaller ones?
No, I mentioned this a bit before. Spacing is key. Birds are going to try to fit into the smallest spaces. They have a really good idea. They're really good at parallel parking, basically. They know the size of their vehicle. So if they have, a 3-inch wingspan, they're going to squeeze right through. So those 12-inch spaces are massive for a hummingbird. So yeah, you're going to want to close up those spaces.
One thing is, I just want to note that a lot of these decals are actually quite large, and they're larger than they need to be. And so I've heard recommended, okay, take that decal and cut it up into smaller pieces and spread it out. And so if you're not putting big decals close together, you're allowing more light and you're allowing more view through. So remember, lines 1/8 of an inch or dots 1/4 inch diameter. So you can actually take those decals, cut them up into little pieces, and then spread them out and get better coverage and fewer collisions while not obstructing your view just by adding more giant decals.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And you might have brought this up, and I apologize for my listening comprehension, but I was desperately trying to monitor this chat and all these wonderful questions. So if I missed this, but I think I'd heard in the past that raptor decals or the outline of raptors might deter birds from coming in because, you know, they're predators to most songbirds. Is there any research that supports that?
That is a myth. They're gonna just fly around it.
Okay. Like they fly around the Cooper's hawk, right?
That's right.
All right, excellent. Kaitlyn, you said earlier that irregular patterns sometimes are more effective, but a lot of the examples you had kind of weren't necessarily irregular. We saw some examples later, so I think the question was like irregular patterns like what? But
yeah, I've seen some cool things where like the dots are closer together and then they spread out, meaning they're still fairly close. But you could see, I think Anikó had the bird tape in the shape of a giraffe. You can do diagonal lines or diagonal lines out of spots or patterns, geometric stuff. There's all kinds of things that you can do. I think a lot of the companies make these regular patterns because it's easier to produce those things. But if you want to get creative, there's a lot of space for you to do that as long as you're just following those marker size and spacing guidelines.
Great. So is there, a glass that's manufactured, for residential homes or residential use that already has, bird-friendly qualities? Somebody mentioned, a couple people mentioned that maybe there's a German product, but that we don't have to add additional things on post-installation?
Yeah, so there is Ornalux glass that I saw mentioned in the chat as well. That is the German company, Arnold Glass produces that. That is a UV bird-friendly pattern. Keep in mind what I mentioned before about UV patterns is it's not always going to work if it's a shaded window or if you don't get a lot of sun or in the early hours during dawn when there virtually is no UV light yet. That window is not going to be as effective as something like a decal or a window film. That is available, but it is very expensive. So commercially, we typically, for commercial buildings, we recommend new glass, but for homeowners, we recommend retrofits. It's just much friendlier to your pocket. Right now, there is no massive residential market at this point, but I know there are several companies working on it.
Great, thank you. We're getting toward the end of our hour. We got so many questions that we're not going to get to. If anyone has a burning question that we don't get to today, please feel free to email us and we'll answer as many of these. I'll pass these along to Anikó and Kaitlyn, and we'll get answers to you post haste. I'll just drop in the chat right now a couple of email addresses you can send your inquiries to, but we do have time for one more before the end. So of interest to those participants that have bird feeders, is there a suggested distance from the window that a bird feeder should be that could minimize the number of fatal, like really far away or just up against the glass so they don't get so much momentum?
Our theory is if you're going to have feeders, you have to have bird-friendly windows. So there's no right spacing, whether you have it right up against the glass and you're going to decrease the impact to the level of impact, that bird is still going to get some sort of injury. If you put it really far away, then it might get chased off into your window. You're inviting these creatures into your habitat, and you want to make it as safe as possible. So if you want to feed them, if you want to offer bird baths, you want to offer them native plants that they're going to come feed on, you're going to want to make your windows bird friendly.
That's great. That's a very important message, and thanks for sharing. Well, anyway, that's all the time we have today. Thanks everyone for joining us. Like I said, we'll try to get to any of your questions that you email us. We won't be able to take them out of the chat if you've already sent them, unfortunately. This has been recorded and will be on the YouTube channels of New York and Connecticut, Audubon New York and Audubon Connecticut in the next couple of days. And our next webinar will be on March 15th. We'll have Tiffany Kirsten with us to present to us about elevating women birders and her record-breaking birding big year in 2021. I hope you can join us for that. But Anikó, Kaitlyn, thank you for joining us today, and thanks everybody else. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.